Hey everyone, Life on Side B is a podcast of Holy Ourselves. You can learn more about Holy Ourselves and everything offered through it by going to Holy Ourselves, WHOLLY ourselves.org. Hello, Life on Side B family. So glad to be with you again as we're just chugging through this final season. If you've noticed, we're releasing episodes every week. Very rare for us, but we're just getting you that content since you haven't had content for a year, and we're going through. This is the first of a really exciting group of episodes we're going to be doing where we go back and talk to previous guests that have been on the podcast, where they've been, how things are going, how life is going, what's changed, what have they learned since then. And I'm so glad that the first person we're doing this with is none other than the OG Life on Side B guest, Meg Baatz. Hey, Meg.
Hey, Josh. It's an honor to be back on here. I'm so excited for this entire series.
Thank you so much. I love that we're getting to do this because you were literally the first episode ever done on this podcast. Which is
Gosh,
so crazy.
It's such an honor. And it's amazing to see everything that has come out of Life on Side B, and just so many stories that I think I will never hear, but even in the past year have heard how it's impacted people.
Yeah. For those of you who know, the funny part is, I feel like of all of the episodes people will have listened to, a lot of people actually, I noticed by the statistics, normally are pretty good about starting at episode 1 and hearing your episode. But if you haven't yet, Meg was on season 1, episode 1, Meg on Communal Living, and then appeared later on in season 2, where it was episode 15, Paul, Ray, Meg, and Ed on race, justice, and the kingdom of God. And I honestly feel like we've heard you sporadically, maybe a few other places, and I don't know, maybe in my brain, you've appeared everywhere. But we're going to talk a little bit about that and stuff. But I would love to just start with, give us a life update. Back when we started, when we did that episode, you and I were working together at Posture Shift, and a lot has changed since then. So
it's been a lot. Yeah. I looked at the date of that episode. It was May 2019. We're recording this December 2025 and probably maybe released later. So it's nearly 6 years of life has happened. So I'm at the point where I feel old in terms of Side B generations, I guess.
Yeah.
I know. And so, a lot has happened. At that time, I was living with a family and a few roommates in this amazing household in Denver. And since then, I had kind of felt like I wanted to try starting a community with some Side B celibate people. So I invited some people to pray through doing that with me. And that ended up being what I did next. So I lived there for about 1.5 years, and I think I started in that community kind of feeling okay, Side B is sort of this movement that's happening, and I have some kind of a voice in it. And there's so many married Christians or straight Christians who, you don't have to be a super Christian or an amazing theologian or entrepreneur to get married and start a family. So why should it be that a Side B person has to be some type of an expert on neo-monastic community or have all this kind of funding or church sponsorship or something, all of these kinds of governance laws behind a household just to have a family and people to come home to. So it was almost an experiment of is this possible? Can Side B people have a family like everybody else without it being super formal? And I think there were some good things that came out of that, and some things that I regret or wish I would have done differently. And I definitely made a lot of mistakes in that community, and I can get into those a little bit later in the episode. But that happened for a while, partly due to the informality of that community. It just was not a long-term thing. It ended up ending. And after that, I ended up having just a lot kind of change in my life. My home was changing. I had gotten to a different place with the church that I had been going to. And then I also was kind of feeling like this opportunity to move into something other than posture shift and start to try to fill in some other gaps that I was seeing were not really being filled by any other LGBTQ. And so, long story short, that ended up leading me to moving to New York and starting Kaleidoscope alongside Life on Side B co-host Elizabeth Delgado Black.
Yeah.
So working with Ray Lowe, who has been on this podcast, was on the race episode with me.
And is going to be on later on in this season.
Yeah. So that'll be so great. He actually, fun fact, he just recorded his episode like 4 floors above me in this like co-working space that we're in. So yeah, that's a just brief summary of the past 6 years.
So great. And it's so hard to summarize 6 years of life. You were in a new city, just different. I mean, creating a new organization. I mean, now how long has Kaleidoscope been around? What, 3 years?
We're going to be going on 4 years.
Crazy. So gorgeous and beautiful, and all the things you guys are doing. I just can't. It's one of these things as we're like in this moment of like wrapping up this space of just going like, did little like Meg and Josh of 2019 just know what was in store for all of these things? No.
The answer is no.
No.
We had no idea.
We had no idea.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's totally. And I'm so glad you've re-listened to the episodes you were on.
Yes.
First of all, I'd love to ask you, how did that feel? Like going back and listening to them?
Yeah. Whenever I listen to a recording of myself, I think I've listened to my voice to start with enough that I'm not like, oh, my voice sounds weird. I'm like, okay, I guess this is just how my voice sounds. But from a practical perspective, I'm always like, oh my gosh, am I going to say something that really didn't age well in some way? Or like, I think my biggest fear is that I was misguided and then I misguided people. Because I think a lot of us in LGBTQ Christian land have seen historically that people with good intentions can do a lot of damage. And so, yeah. So when I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, like I've made a lot of mistakes in my life since this episode, or like there are ways that my ideals for community didn't work out for me. And is this something that I misled people into? And I don't know exactly the fruit of that episode, but in listening to it, I don't think I necessarily heard anything that I felt like, oh, that's really bad. I did talk a lot about the principles that mattered to me and why I thought living in community as a side B person could be a hopeful and practical way to live. And I still stand by that. I think of like just the idea of like marriage. Like marriage is an institution that is created by God, and it's something that a lot of people have been deeply hurt by or within marriages. But I don't think that necessarily means that we look at marriage and say, oh, this is terrible, nobody should do this. Like, I think there's a lot of critiques that our society has about how we do marriage, and I think those are important to look into. But all to say, I think I look at the idea of living in community and I still see it as a good. But I think what I've learned is just it's very challenging to do. I mean, you have 2 people who are imperfect but well-intended and care for each other to have a successful marriage, however you might want to define that, like, to stick together and be reasonably content in following Jesus together. And that is difficult. And I think what I've learned is like how much more difficult it is to get more than 2 people to live together for any length of committed time and have that be a positive and God honoring and growing experience.
Totally. Like I've experienced this also since we've since we started that episode, since we did that episode, like I had lived, and it's even crazy in my own life. Like I was living with a family in Colombia at the time, which was its own version of like communal living. And like to my communal situation now, similarly, it's like we have this idea of like marriage, and that's with all the support that comes with marriage. And then you have this other thing that involves more people, like more like growth and needed and all these things, and yet we have so much higher expectations, like it needs to happen and you can't fall or else we question the whole institution. But I was gonna say I resonate with your fear of like going back for a moment. on like the fear of like, did I like mislead people with bad intentions? I totally resonate with that because we're like just trying to find, you know, the way forward, you know, and a lot of, I'm so glad we got to start with your episode on communal living. Because even with everything of the journey of life on side B and so many questions that we face, I love that we were able to start with the very practical idea of like just doing life together. Like put aside identity and morality and all these things, just like how do we find a vision of doing life together? And so first of all, I'm so glad we got to do that. And a lot of this is so experimental. It's just, we're figuring it out as we go. And so, you know, as you're saying, like now you've had these chances of like, you know, trying to test it out and being like, wow, this worked or this didn't work, or I could have handled that better. So yeah, it's like, what have some of your lessons learned? Like what you'd be up for sharing of like, as you've gone through this now more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I briefly mentioned that I kind of came in with this thesis
in
my experiment. And it was like, I want to almost like prove that side B people can have family too. And I really wanted to believe that. I thought that was, I still think that that's a beautiful, equitable thing. But practically what I found is that put a lot of pressure on my community. I was here trying to show off my community to the world and present it as this example of what a good Christian side B household can look like. And I realized that pressure was not fair to my housemates. That was not something that they had signed up for. And one of my housemates at the time had brought that up to me. And I realized that was, while it was a good intention, that wasn't put undue pressure on our community. So from then on, it was like, I want to be really careful about how I talk about my community and be more aware of like, even relationally, what does consent look like when it comes to people opting into having a community be shared about publicly versus simply lived out. So that was one of the things that I learned. I think another one, I like took some notes on this. I want to make sure that I am getting
in good
these.
Meg fashion, got the notes ahead of time.
I like being prepared, but also sometimes I come too prepared. Let's see. Okay. Another thing I found is when I stepped into community, I was like, oh, I don't want it to have to be this big deal. I want it to be informal. I don't want it to have to be so regimented. And I do think that what I learned is if you do have a community that you want to last for any length of time, there are a lot of different expectations coming into that community that people, you might think that you're coming in with similar expectations because you use the same language to talk about your vision. But people come in and things are different from what they expected, and that leads to disappointment. So I think if I were to do community living again, I would either say it's good to talk with everyone who is involved and be really clear about the vision, the expectations, and even what happens when they aren't met. In starting a nonprofit, one of the things that you have to do legally is create governance documents. So you have these bylaws that are like, here's how you select leaders, here's how you make decisions, here's what happens if there's a conflict of interest, if there are people who how they're engaging is actually not going to be beneficial for the community as a whole. And how do you do that while supporting the individual? And there's a dissolution clause. So it's like, okay, if this doesn't work out, what is to happen? So I think I would either want to have that, or I would want to say, recognize that there absolutely will be disappointments if you're going into a community. And that's true even if you try to have all the perfect documentation and preparation. Yes. It's never going to look exactly like you want it to be. And it just reminds me of that quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer from Life Together that just says, like, yeah, if you love your idea of community, then you won't love your actual community.
Yeah. It's just never, it's so messy. Community is just so messy, and having to like just accept what you have over like what you hope it to be kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the reality.
Yeah. one other thing that I have recognized is I think there's ways in which being side B can kind of perpetuate like an avoidant attachment. Like, I think part of me is I don't want to commit. Like, I've lived a lot of different places with a lot of different people. And in my 20s, I really loved that. I think I didn't want to really settle down anywhere. And I figured that's probably just something I'll have to do someday because I just won't have the energy to keep up my like very nomadic life. But I don't want to just step into levels of commitment in relationship just because of my weaknesses, I guess, or like because I'm getting older. Like, I really think when I look at who God is a God of covenant and promise. And I think being a side B and celibate person, it's hard to relate to that because I feel almost like, well, I'm not supposed to make covenants with people, or that's off limits to me. And if I do make commitments, I think I just have the typical like avoidant attachment responses of like, oh, I don't want to feel trapped, or I what if something goes wrong, or someone gets tired of me, or vice versa. And I think, yeah, side B naturally doesn't necessarily push me into looking into those things, but I think that's absolutely worth looking into and saying, okay, it is good to make commitments, and there are ways that I can do that as a celibate person, and that's worth pursuing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you bring that up because I really do think that that is a huge thing. And I think that there is an aspect of it that is even broader in the queer community, but I 100% think that you're like spot on about side B. And it's even just like how many times the church gets hesitant if we want to commit to celibacy for lifelong. They're like, well, hold off, and we might feel that too. Cause I'm like, am I taking all these things off the table?
Yeah.
When I say this is how I'm going to live my life, but then even more with community, because you're just like, what if I want to move to another city, or what if these things, and like the avoidance of like being stuck. And I'm theorizing, everyone, so don't come after me. But like, I wonder if some of that comes from the experience of the closet, of being stuck, and then we get the liberation of coming out, of figuring ourselves out, and that fear of being in a place again where we feel trapped and we feel like we can't move anymore.
Yeah.
And it's scary, but that's the hard part of commitment, is like committing to something is also not committing to other things. Is
Absolutely,
saying
yeah.
no.
Yeah. I think it can be, and I say this with so much grace and compassion toward myself and other people who might have, I don't know, avoidant tendencies, but there can be an avoidance of grief in that too. Like, even starting a community, it was like, well, I don't want to be all like mopey about the fact that I'm probably like not going to get married. So I'll just live my happy spinster life, right? Like it's not sad. Everyone wants to pity me, but there's nothing to pity because there's so much dignity in it. And it's true. Like, my life has dignity even when people won't recognize it. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't give myself room to grieve the fact that, like, no, this is sad. And it's almost like, unfortunately, there are a million little griefs across this life. And that's true for side B. That's true for other people. But again, sometimes I can compare my life and be like, well, everyone has things to be sad about. But that can be a way that I minimize grief too. And it's like, no, your particular life, there's a lot to grieve.
There's hard, and there's hardship, and there's like difficulty, and it's like worth grieving, like, for you. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's so, first of all, side note, I love that you brought up Spencer, because it reminded me of the moment when you were like, I want to like bring back Spinster, or like,
yes.
I loved that moment. But going back to this, yeah, there's totally, there's the grief, and we don't, I think often because we're just like, I've already been grieving a lot, or, I shouldn't have a reason to grieve, but it's like, being able to have that. Yeah. I mean, obviously you've been talking about lessons, which I think are just so good, but is there, I guess maybe through those lessons that you've been learning, if you were now to give thoughts to someone wanting to like pursue communal living in some form, whether very formal or just roommate. I'm throwing this question at you. I didn't.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good.
yeah, would there be anything you would guide in that? Maybe more nuance, like, from these lessons that you've learned?
Yeah. I think one of the first things I would do is try to connect them into people who have been doing communal living or intentional community for a very long time. So I would probably refer them to someone like Lynn Malone, who is amazing, and her community has been doing this for decades, and there's a lot that they learned. I would encourage them to almost go visit other communities. There's different networks of community that do seminars or learning. So I would say go on a discernment process, and also recognize that even if community is for you and you say yes to it, there's also a million smaller decisions that you'll need to discern. And also there's not necessarily a way to avoid making mistakes. Anticipate that your community will be imperfect and you'll have disappointments, because you will. And the amount of preparation that you do won't prevent that. I think one other thing I would add is just as you're looking for people to live in your community, make that a communal decision process too, and almost treat that like an application process, like for a job where you have people kind of answer questions about what they're looking to do, but also get references for someone on just, are these things that have been consistent in their character? Is a person who, if you're making a side B community or a Christian community, is this something that's really brand new for them? They might end up changing their mind. If so, is that something that would be sustainable in your community? And if not, if someone changes their theology or something, do you have things in place to ensure that they have a place to move on to that doesn't put them at risk?
Such good things. I love that you brought up Lynn Malone, because I was thinking the same as when you said it. It was try out these communities. I know their community has you can stay, try out and things there's not this pressure even necessarily to start something yourself. But I also love where you're talking about how do you engage well with community of people, because not everyone is a great fit. You're not meant to do life with everyone, and that's totally fine. But how do you do it in an honorable way when it's is this not a great fit? Cool. We still want others to find good places and things. Yeah. Amazing. Were you going to say something else? Go ahead.
Sure. I'll add one other thing, which is just that sometimes it can feel, as a side B person, what you're trying to do has never been done before, that nobody else is doing this. And it can feel like you're blazing a new trail, you're trying to determine, well, I want a really meaningful friendship, but our society doesn't have language for what that looks like. Or even church tradition, there might be elements of that, but that might look different in the modern times, or your family members or loved ones might not understand that. And I think, I want to reiterate that it's important to listen to the wisdom of more seasoned generations and seek to become elders someday for younger generations. But just to, give yourself some grace, because there's not nearly as much scaffolding for us to determine what our lives might look like. And that leaves a lot of room for more differences in expectations and disappointments, just simply in trying to meet each other in what kind of relationships we're seeking to form.
I just want to say, I'm so thankful for you, Meg Baatz, and your voice and the way that you are able to speak so humbly and so wise into these kind of spaces, even as you grow in your own journey, and being able to speak from that vulnerability and speak from that journey of as you're growing. And similarly, as we didn't know what happened 6 years before had in store for us, the us 6 years from now is going to look and be oh, baby Megan, same way. And it's going to be the next journey, and it's going to be the next lessons and all of these things. And the being able so far, up to this point, know you and watch you, I look back and still do not regret with any hesitation that you were the first guest to be on this and to start this journey with me. And I'm so thankful for what you do, both in Kaleidoscope and like in your speaking, but I just think also like as a like human being following Jesus, like so.
Thank you, Josh.
Amazing.
I received that. It's such an honor to still know you as well, and just to see how like your vocation has grown, and even how this podcast has been such a huge part of helping other people become what God is making them to be, but also seeing how it has really changed you. And I'm so glad to know you after all these years. I'm so grateful to know Bill at Posture Shift and just be connected with so many people.
Yeah, 100%. And I received that as well. Thanks. Yeah, everyone, if you want to learn more about Meg and her work and Kaleidoscope, check out kaleidoscopeusa.org, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to point people to?
We're also on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at kaleidoscope.usa and TikTok at the same handle, kaleidoscope.usa.
Great. All right, everyone. We will be back in a moment, and then we will be going into another interview with a previous guest. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Meg.
Thank you.
Hello, Johana Marie. How are you?
I am good. Yeah, I'm good.
I'm not very good at introductions, but it's so good to see you.
It's good to see you as well.
Listeners,
Yeah.
we talk fairly frequently because we are involved in projects together. So that is why I am not expressing like, oh my gosh, it's been ages, because I have seen you recently.
Yes. We just talked Slack through like Google Drive comments.
Yeah, we shared a Google Drive. It was a Google file. It was very, very intimate. Well, it's so nice to have you back on the podcast. It has been 2 years. It's been 2 years since you
I
last
guess it
here.
has.
Time flies when you're having fun. Have you been having a lot of fun since you came on the podcast?
You know, I can't say that I have not. We're going to double negative it up. It's definitely been a complicated time. But fun has been had.
What does your life look like right now? Like, what's going on in your life? What are your projects? That kind of thing.
So I guess in the last year, what I've mostly been doing is acclimating to my job as an archivist. So that's a new development, and I absolutely love working in the cultural arts, working with historical documents, and working with researchers to really understand and find the historical documents that they're looking for. It's all super fun to me. Basically, if you like gossip but don't like the damage it does, you should become an archivist, because it's all like historical gossip. And you also then get to like read it all and catalog it all and organize it and create your little like murder board in your office and run to your colleague and be like, you will not believe what I just read in this letter. President so-and-so of such university was definitely in town with this other person. And yeah, it's all that kind of fun stuff. And like, so like spicy stuff, but also like really meaningful works and like movements, particularly like here in Florida at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, a lot of that history. So there's really fun, spicy stuff, really meaningful stuff, sometimes really boring stuff. You have to read meeting minutes of a committee from the 1950s every month for 5 years straight.
Oh,
it can get kind of boring.
I didn't even read
sometimes there's a gym
minutes
in there.
of a meeting I was actually in.
Right? Someone will. Hopefully someone someday will read those minutes and understand you and whatever organization you're a part of better. And that's what we do as archivists.
That's great.
Preserve those
Yeah. From now on, I'm going to include a little like, so dear future archivists, I I'm so sorry. So sorry. Oh, that's fun. So when you say
that could get really meta.
it could, yeah. When you say that it doesn't hurt people, is it mostly because all the people you're looking at are like dead?
Yeah, for the most part.
For the
Or
most part.
sometimes they're not, so you got to be a little more circumspect, right?
Ooh.
But there's just like, oh my gosh, you guys will not believe getting to have that guilt-free. I have
That's
hot tea to
awesome.
spill moment.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so good. Oh wow, you're really selling
Highly
it. Maybe I should.
recommend.
Yeah, that's it.
I
I'm done
know
with
history
school.
might be for you.
Well,
More school. Yay!
yeah, maybe this isn't the right time to sell me on more school.
I think that's
we-
fair.
We are recording at the tail end of the semester. I have several papers to write. So, but yeah, as soon as I get a couple weeks of a break, I'm gonna be itching to hit the books again. That's how my brain works.
Yeah.
Well, that's so fun. I'm so excited that you get to do something that you really, really love.
Yeah.
Our listeners last time, so I think you appeared on 2 episodes. One was on Deconstruction. I was with me and Bekah. And then you appeared on another one where you discussed with Shelby and Sarah Abby about, I think it was racial inclusion, racial justice inside me. So that's where some of our listeners may remember you from. So, I guess this is sort of an unformed question, but you have an opportunity for an addendum. Have you developed on thinking about, of course, this is all assuming that you remember with crystal clarity everything that was said in those conversations. And I'm going to be honest, I for sure don't. But, yes, do you have any thoughts on either doubt, deconstruction, or racial justice, racial inclusion inside B?
Wow, those are such big topics, but
yeah. Do you just want to talk about anything for 5 minutes?
Right. But no, I think especially when it comes to like racial inclusion inside B, I think what we have definitely seen even over the last 2 years is a huge increase in racial inclusion, a huge increase in the ethnic diversity of, voices speaking into this space, and speaking into the ways that makes our experiences different and also sometimes very much the same. And that's actually been really heartening to see, to be at like Revoice, to be at something like Revoice and be over the years learn to be like, oh, there's literally double the African American people here than there were last year.
Yeah.
And seeing how that gets to inform not just these groups of people, but the whole experience we have together, and how we're processing what it means to be a Christian inside B, what it means to be in community and like faith communities, but also building these like queer communities that love the Lord and are thinking really what's the word I'm looking for? Thinking really intentionally about what it means to live a holistic life and bringing all of the diversity of that experience to answer that question of what does it mean to be whole as a side B person, as a person who might not find all the things that they're looking for in the traditional church experience just because of where the church is right now, and how it cares for LGBTQ folks. And to see kind of a true like vibrancy come from that. over like the whole experience. So it has been really cool. Just seeing the fruit of many people's work, right? Of reaching out, having those like one-on-one coffees with people that they might not have had the chance to talk to before, in different organizations and in different spaces. So yeah, that has been very joyful to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I have noticed over the past even couple years is like Revoice has really grown in ethnic and cultural diversity. And in some ways, it's like, it's been intentional about that in ways that I haven't seen in a lot of other places. But I wonder if that's just me not being in places that are very intentional about diversity. So I'd love to get your thoughts on like the liturgy of Revoice, and I even think like I get excited thinking about the ways that Side B can be a place where we can like be in community with each other across denominational lines, across cultural lines, across racial lines. I get really excited every year because sometimes at Revoice, I'm uncomfortable with the way the liturgy goes. And I know that means that other people are comfortable, and like we're bringing all these communities together. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on like Revoice in particular over the last few years, or how like racial and ethnic diversity relates to other kinds of diversity within Side B.
I think my thoughts on that are concern both of those, in that I think the purposeful denominational diversity has made ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity possible. Because the reality is, or more possible than it might be in some other spaces. We're dealing with a topic that just affects humanity, sexuality, particularly sexual minorities and gender minorities. And that's in every community, as much as some folks don't want to acknowledge that. And this, in fact, shows up in every human community at every point in history, so on and so forth. So there's something very universal, you know what I mean, in that experience. For those who have that experience, at the least, it's universal. There's something universal in that experience. And I think Revoice being really, the reality is many denominations are culturally tied. They arose in a historical context, in a geographical context, and therefore in a cultural context. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's been a lot of denominations that have served very particular, beautiful purposes to help preserve and care for the people of their cultures. But Revoice being a little bit more open, in pulling different aspects from these different liturgical formats from all these different denominations means that there's like less of a hurdle for someone coming from a Black Baptist church. Even if they're not totally comfortable, it's not the in your face, I'm going to encounter something that where my theology, meter inside goes like, wait, what are you saying? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On the denominational level, not even talking about sexuality, just on, the things the reality, the things we disagree about. And minimizing those for the things we do agree about, which is the person of Jesus and his call in our lives and how we want to respond to that. And worship has made it so that, because I have been in spaces, many different spaces that have tried to be intentional about ethnic and racial diversity. And one of the things I think people find out, sometimes they approach it in a very, like, we want to build relationships across communal lines, and they pick communities that they don't have other things in common with. And that's well meant, right? It's meant to be like, we know we're different and we know we have problems with difference and we're trying to cross those problems and da-da-da-da. But the reality is, when you're actually building relationships with people, we build relationships with people that we relate to. So one of the things that helps when you're trying to build cross difference and like racial and ethnic difference is to have a lot of other things in common. So similar denominations, similar style of worship, similar socioeconomic status, so on and so forth. Or if you're crossing socioeconomic lines, having all those other things in common, like race or ethnicity, other general culture, you know what I mean? Like focusing on one difference can make crossing difference easier versus focusing on 5 differences and then trying to relate to someone who especially if you're not experienced in crossing difference, you might not have the tools that will really help make that a productive and beautiful connection. And sometimes the Holy Spirit just does whatever he wants to. You know what I mean? Like the Spirit moves and people connect, and that is, and we really can't attribute that to the grace of God because we see when it's not in the grace of God, and it's like that was a mess. That's true. Yeah, that did not work. Actually, we have nothing in common. We're not sure if we like each other, and we're not sure if we want to see each other in heaven. Like, you know what I mean? I've seen where that happens, but I've also this is not to discount like the work of God in building relationships and binding us together as brothers, sisters, siblings in Christ. But just to point out that like relatability is a part of building relationship, and having a space where there is a huge amount of relatability and a lowering of the barriers to that relatability has probably done a lot to help that.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think what I'm hearing you say, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people think of diversity, like striving for diversity in a community, as a kind of constraint, like that makes things more difficult. But I think the way you're saying it is that like building diversity and like seeking diversity in a community actually makes everything easier in some ways. Like it builds relationships because like there's not just like 2 very different people. There's like a whole spectrum of differences, and crossing those boundaries is easier when it's like a small difference. And then you build up like a cultural awareness, and then you can cross bigger differences, and it becomes easier, not harder. I don't know. That's really exciting.
I think it becomes easier if you do it intentionally and within the capabilities that you already have. Because I think most of the times it's actually really freaking hard. It is hard. It is like really frustrating. But like, I don't know, that focusing in on like, well, let's just address this one thing and build relationships with people who are different from us in this one way. And do it intentionally, like purposefully, like looking at what are the barriers to that and lowering those can make addressing a following difference. Yeah. So yes.
But it requires something.
Yeah.
It certainly does. It reminds me, one of my friends said something like, the only thing that keeps Side B, like, the only thing that makes Side B community is the fact that we worship Jesus and we try not to have same-sex sex. And like, that binds us all together, and we can at least agree on that. So when we go to this conference, we can be like, okay, we know one thing about each other, so we can work with that. We can work with that. We can, And sometimes, like, our approaches to the second thing are so widely different that we really have to rely on that first one.
We really have to be like, I guess.
So Jesus.
So Jesus. Okay, Jesus. That's right.
That's awesome.
No, I think that's so true. But it's like, but both of those are such like deep and intimate things that even though they are technically very like, it feels like it should be a very thin edge to build relationship on with other people. But they're also such intimate things that shape so much of your life.
Yeah, that's true.
That it ends up actually being a bigger ledge, a bigger like working space for relationship than you would think, than you would initially think. I think, especially people who aren't in this experience. I do encounter straight people sometimes who are like, I don't understand, like, all the LGBTQ, they're all different. Like, what even makes you community? And I'm like, from within, I'm like, what are you even, so do you not see us? Like,
Yeah.
what do we look like? We belong together.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, what do you even say? Like, I don't know. But I had to think about it. It's like, from the outside, it looks like a sliver because people aren't really examining how much their sexuality actually affects their culture, their family, their life, their da-da-da-da.
That point.
So I'm like, oh, well, you're just how is attraction enough to build a community? I'm like, well, I don't know. Look at that. There's evidence in front of you.
It's hard to even explain. Yeah.
Right. Like, sharing such an intimate experience with another person.
Yeah.
It is different. I don't know.
I think also Revoice is a place where people have spent a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of their heart on a particular thing, and that is the one thing bringing them all together. So that definitely can be a basis for engaging cross-culturally, for racial reconciliation, if you let it, like if you're intentional, if you don't sort of sequester that part of your life off from the rest of your life. But yeah, like, I mean, deciding to live your whole life in a certain way that most of society is telling you not to live because you worship a Jewish man from 2,000 years ago. Like, that's a big decision.
Well, bonds here over this.
Yeah, blood is thicker than water.
Circumstance.
Yeah, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb.
Is thicker than the water of the womb, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I think that is a good segue. Well, it's a segue into the next. So we're talking about how much, like, Jesus is important to us and how much we've made decisions to follow Jesus with our whole lives. But, one of the last conversations I had with you on the podcast was about doubt and deconstruction. And I think we as a culture have maybe moved past the deconstruction moment that we had for a while, which is not to say that there aren't people still deconstructing, but for a while it was really in the spotlight. And now it is maybe less in the spotlight. So as you've, over the last 2 years, have your thoughts matured or changed, or did you, I don't know, immatured? how are they
immatured? It's like, I devolved into my adolescent self, actually. No. Because from what I remember of that conversation, one of the things I was talking about was, while I definitely had a significant moment in life where I was also processing what I believed, talking about how I'd already been engaging in that practice through most of my life over other topics, like we were just talking about, over race, over ethnicity, over what it means to be a woman in the church who is a Christian, like all those kinds of things. So, and I don't know if I said that then, but I don't think that ever stops. If you're a person who is open, who is basically like, I want my beliefs to align with reality. Therefore, I am always open to receiving new information, processing that, and coming to a new conclusion if necessary. Then that's the part. I think maybe I don't super understand about deconstruction. I was like, aren't we supposed to be doing this all the time? I think that I also understand that, as conservative as my upbringing was, there were some significant things that helped make that less dogmatic. than it was for
Right.
other people. So maybe they did not get the chance to do that all the time. So that's not,
yeah.
I'm not trying to be ungracious. But because I think if you've been grown up in a very closed system, and I would even say mine was a very like closed religious system, but there are just some things like being Black, some things like living in the place they do, some things like parents being very committed to cross-cultural missions that just shake, you know what I mean? It shakes it up enough to provide
Yeah.
room. I don't want to deny that other people have. I don't want to pretend other people have always been granted that room. But I can say that my personal experience is that I'm always sitting back and being like, do we still believe this? What is da-da-da-da? Well, I'll take in some new information and be like, that sounds dumb. And then be like, encounter it again and be like, I should think about that. Encounter it again and be like, do I agree? Or just, you know what I mean? Like, staying in that process, while also staying committed to the values that I have as the grounding point, of like loving the Lord, loving others, care, like the whole like vision that we as Christians have for, that we have as, you know, the kingdom of God coming on earth and what that means and looks like. So that, I mean, that there are definitely some things that I'm thinking super deeply about, I think, that I have thought about before, that I'm reconsidering even now, and probably will be in 2 more years too. So yeah.
I appreciate that emphasis on like it's perpetual. We're always doing that, and it makes me wonder if deconstruction, like a building metaphor, is even the right metaphor for that. I wonder if it's like a lot more like gardening, you know, like pruning and transplanting. Sometimes you need a bigger pot, and like once it's established, things you can let it grow, and it can grow more fully, that sort of thing. I don't know.
But, and so I guess to honor deconstruction, the reality is some people probably don't have as much, they didn't have space for the garden in the way that life and thought about, especially about God and Jesus and the church, was constructed for them. Didn't have a garden. It was a fortress, and a brittle one. And when it all tumbles down, it's like, well, I want a garden now. You got to clear out a lot of stone for that. So I do want to like, absolutely. At some point, you got to get to gardening. You got to get to gardening.
Yeah, something more organic. I gotta integrate that into my vision of deconstruction and reconstruction. Because I think all mine is necessarily colored by the fact that, like, in some ways I deconstructed, but in other ways, like, I became a Catholic.
Right.
Like, I constructed. Or, like, it's
actually a cathedral now?
Yeah, it's a... Like, I got invested in a whole structure. But yeah. I think those are helpful thoughts. Well, Johana Marie, it has been lovely to talk with you. There's so much more that we could talk about. But lucky for our listeners, there is a way for them to hear more from you. Tell our listeners about that way.
I would love to do that. In fact, and they can hear more from you too, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so earlier this year, Chase
Was it this year?
Wow. Was it last year? Oh
was
my
it
God.
Late
Was it?
last
I
year?
thought it was this year.
It was a while ago. You can tell we've been out of it for a minute.
Yeah, things happened.
Many moons ago.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It was last year. Yes, long ago in a land far away, Chase Sachs approached some friends to talk about writing, who are side B and love writing, and have probably shared some conversations in the past, to see if we all wanted to get together to start a writing collective. and it's literally called A Side B Collective. It's on Substack. And search A Side B Collective in quotes, and you will find us on Substack.
Wait, is it Side B Writing Collective? Is it a Side B?
No, A Side B. It's a side because it's the same as another community, ASBC.
Yes.
A Side B Collective. We did that accidentally, but sometimes where you come from seeps into your bones and it comes out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we write there on a monthly basis. We take turns throughout the weeks of that month publishing our writings, our reflections, and it's meant to be a space where we can share a little less traditionally about our experiences as Christians, as queer folks, each from our particular ethnic contexts and cultural contexts, and just what we're thinking about, creating a space to foster each other's work and creative thinking and approach to the world. And if nobody else is listening, at least the four of us are listening and reading each other's work and commenting and fostering that conversation, because that helps. I don't know. I'm not necessarily an external processor, but the feedback it really helps. Those comments we leave each other when we're working on our pieces really help. And we would love to invite you to experience some of that at Side B Collective.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed writing with you all. It's been nice to have an additional sort of kick in the pants to write more often. And it's nice. It's not good for a writer to be alone.
It is not.
So it's been helpful to write with you all. You just had a piece come out recently. Was that a day or two ago? Is that true? Did you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
The script. So.
Yeah. So we would love for you to read that, dear listeners. So you can find us both over there. But it was so lovely to chat with you. So good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. I had so much fun, as we always do when we actually get to talking to each other semi face to face.
Yes. Yeah.